Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
What's up, Badgers fans? It's another episode of The Red Zone. I'm your host, Jason Galloway with the Wisconsin State Journal. We already did our first episode of The Red Zone back on Wednesday. We talked to Tom Oates, our columnist here at the State Journal, as well as Duron Harrell, the redshirt freshman cornerback for the Badgers. So make sure you go check that out. This week, or this episode, I should say, is obviously our mailbag episode that we do every Friday. Our last one of the regular season, but we have a ton of questions today, so I'm going to get right to them. First one's from Tom Gimiola at Gimola. Sorry if I said that terribly wrong there. Do you think that Coach tried too hard to find balance and didn't let the O-line lean on opponents so that it would pay dividends late in games? Seems like losses and lower time of possession went hand in hand. You know, I don't think that was really the issue. I think with the lower time of possession, a lot of that's just not converting third down. Especially, like, you take a look at the Michigan game, for example. They ran the ball really well in that game, and they relied on the run a lot. But when they got into those third down situations, you know, that they just weren't able to convert. And, you know, if you're going 3 and out, you know, in that Michigan game, a lot of times they ran for, they got in those 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3 situations, and you could argue maybe they should have ran more in those 3rd and short situations, but they just weren't able to convert those. I think that's really what, and Paul Chris has talked about that a lot, just needing to convert more third downs. That's something that this offense actually did a really good job of the last couple of years, kind of sneakily, is converting their third down attempts. And so I think they've been trying to establish the run as much as they have in other seasons. You know, I don't think that they necessarily need to lean on their offensive line in the running game more than they have. And I feel like they've been doing that. It's just a matter of keeping those drives alive with more third down conversions, I think. Next one's from Matty Ice at Scony Matt 24. Why do you think the O-line has struggled so much this season? Worn down, lack of discipline, experience, tough opponents, front seven, fluke, etc. Or do you think their struggles have been over-exaggerated by inconsistent quarterback play for multiple reasons? Yeah, I think it has been a little over-exaggerated. I feel like I'm sort of on an island here thinking the offensive line has still played pretty well this season. I mean, they have had a couple bad games. I mean, the BYU game, they didn't play well. The Penn State game, I didn't feel like they played well at all either, especially in pass protection that week. But I feel like, they played pretty well. I mean, you could argue they didn't play very well in the Northwestern game, but I feel like they were kind of hamstrung by the offense, the limited offense, and Northwestern kind of knowing that they wanted to run the ball and not really having a threat of a downfield passing game. Kind of like you said with the inconsistent quarterback play. I think in the Northwestern game in particular, that kind of hurt them. But I think overall they've been pretty good. Now, the expectations were so high for that group. Have they fallen short of expectations? I think maybe a little bit they have. I think, when you have the expectations of being the best offensive line in the country and you have all the All-American talent, you kind of expect that consistency game in and game out to be a little bit better than it has. But I do think that they've played well on the whole, and I think that they've been pretty good. Now, I like you said, I think that the lack of a passing game has made it a little bit more difficult. I mean, the fact that they haven't been able to pass the ball consistently this year, and Jonathan Taylor is still knocking on the door 2,000 yards, I think tells you a lot. And I think they've still been able to run the ball pretty well. I think from a run blocking perspective, almost every game this year they've been really good. But again, it's just one of those things where if you have this high of expectations as a group, if you have a couple bad games, you have a couple moments there where it doesn't look good, I think that really kind of changes the perception that people have of the group. So I think that while I think they probably could have played better this year, I maybe expected them to play maybe a little bit better than they have, a little bit more consistent than they have, maybe I should say more than anything. I don't think it's been, I think it's been a little overblown, how poorly they played this season. All right, next one from Scotty Rand, PhD, at Rand_Scotty. The question is, what is the injury rate this year versus last year? And then what has changed in regards to stretching pregame warm-ups and strength training from this year to last year? The injury rate, I haven't added up the numbers, but I don't think the number of injuries is much more this year than it was last year. I think it stands out more because the injuries came at positions where they kind of couldn't afford to have injuries. Obviously Garrett with his injury, and then Isaiah Laudermilk, being injured for a chunk of the season on the defensive line. That's just a spot where they didn't have a lot of depth and they really couldn't afford guys to go down. Of course, Songapolu going out for the season a few weeks ago as well. And then in the secondary, they went through a run there where they had a lot of injuries, and they're already really young at that position. And so I think that when you have a lot of injuries in specific spots where you don't have a lot of depth, then I think it really stands out, and it seems like the team is suffering from more injuries than previous seasons. Now, it may be a little bit more than the last year. I haven't crunched the numbers or anything or gone back and added it up. But I don't really see it as a situation where the injury rate really skyrocketed this year or anything like that. Now, as far as stretching and pregame warmups, I haven't seen any difference last year from this year from what they've done. From everything I've seen before the game, it looks exactly the same as previous years that I've covered the team. And the strength training, now, we don't talk to the strength coaches on a regular basis, so I haven't really asked anybody if they've done anything too different from a strength training perspective. I haven't heard that they have, but I haven't really, asked that question particularly, so I couldn't really tell you for sure on that. But as far as the injury rate and the the pregame warmups and stuff, I don't think there have really been much of any changes in that regard. All right, Jake Kokorowski, who's been on the Red Zone podcast a couple times this year, at JakeCocoB5Q, asked what my favorite Thanksgiving dish was. I feel like I can't pick one dish. I feel like you have to pick like a favorite bite. I mean, I never eat one thing at a time, right? So I would say my favorite Thanksgiving bite is probably a little bit of dark meat turkey, a little bit of mashed potatoes, a little bit of stuffing, and instead of eating it off a fork, you scoop it with the bread roll. That's probably my ideal bite for Thanksgiving. So if I had to pick one dish, that's a tough one. I'd probably go with stuffing. I'm a pretty big fan there. All right, Tony Hoffman at Badger Fannot. He asks, with the quarterback recruit Graham Mertz coming in, how quickly can Wisconsin get back to the 50-50 balance that proved successful in the past? That's a good question, Tony. That's the thing. I don't know if we can really expect Graham Mertz to start right away. Now, there's certainly a chance he comes in here and is in the spring and is just on another level and is as amazing as people hope he could be, and maybe he competes for the job right away. I think it's more likely that he at least sits 1 year while Hornibrook is a senior, and then maybe competes for the job the next season. So I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of difference in the quarterback position next year. If I had to guess, I think Alex Hornibrook will probably start again next season. So now that doesn't mean they can't get closer to the 50-50 balance that they've had this year. I think that they were a lot closer to that in 2017 than they were this year. So I think that, obviously you want to see Hornibrook or whoever's at quarterback play a little bit more consistently than they've gotten out of that position this year. But so I don't necessarily think Mertz coming in is necessarily the answer, the immediate answer to getting back to that balance. So while he's an exciting recruit, I think people should be excited for him. He looks like he could end up being the real deal. I don't think we want to put the expectation that he can come in here right away and suddenly make this a juggernaut offense immediately, or even win the starting job immediately. So I think they have a chance to get closer to that 50-50 balance next year, but I don't know if Mertz is going to be the one to kind of lead them in that direction right away, at least. All right, Bill_Woj at Slow_Creek asks, what are the NCAA requirements for disclosing injuries? There are none, Bill. That's there are none at all. Wisconsin releases their injury report really out of a courtesy. They just I think it kind of eliminates, not eliminates, but kind of cuts down on the number of injury questions that Paul Chris gets, and that's the reason why they probably want to do that. So as far as they can do whatever they want with the injury report. They could take it away at any time. They could change how many times they give it to us. They could, put whoever they want on there. There's not really any requirements. They started doing this a couple years ago, sort of on their own. So I think with the legalization of sports gambling, that could potentially change in the next couple years. There's a chance it could go to more of an NFL model, where there is some sort of requirements for disclosing injuries, but at this point there's not. Doug Pierce at DougPierce20 asks, what is the story with Lottie not punting. Not really sure on that one. Connor Allen started punting. I think Northwestern was the first game he started punting, and I think after that game, I asked Paul Christ and basically just said, liked what Connor Allen was giving them in practice, and I guess without any other, I guess we kind of have to take that for what it is at this point. And Allen had the nice 50-yard punt, near the end of the Purdue game that really helped them force overtime there. But otherwise, his average is actually still a little bit lower than Lottie's has been this season by a couple yards. So I don't know if the switch has really, improved their punting on the whole. So I'm not really sure exactly what's going on there. If Lottie can possibly get back on the field, both of them have, I think, one more year after this. So it'll be interesting to see going forward after this year if maybe we can get some more answers on that in the offseason too, when assistant coaches are available again. Maybe talk to Chris Herring about kind of what went into that, what went into those decisions and kind of where those two guys are at. All right, Bucky fan at DJ4641 asks your thoughts on the QB situation rest of the year and projections for next year. Yeah, I guess I kind of sort of touched on this already. I think if Alex Hornibrook is, as far as this year, I think if Alex Hornibrook is healthy, he's going to play in this game on Saturday and in the bowl game. With Jack Cohn at 4 games, I think they want to redshirt him if possible. Now, I'm recording this Friday morning before Wisconsin releases their injury report. Normally it comes out on Thursday, but with Thanksgiving, it's coming out today on a Friday. So there's a chance after I post this that, things could change. We could know Hornibrook's status. I doubt that's going to be the case. I would guess he's probably still going to be listed as questionable today. But I think if he is cleared, I think they're going to play him Saturday, and he's going to play the last 2 games. Now, if he's not, they're not going to worry about, trying to preserve Cohn's red shirt by throwing Danny Vandenboom out there or anything like that. Cohn will play if Hornibrook's not healthy. That's really what it comes down to for the rest of the season, is just the health of Hornibrook, I think. As far as next year, like I said earlier, I think that Hornibrook, if I had to guess right now, I think Hornibrook is still going to be the starter for one more year, his senior year, before either Cohn or somebody else takes over in 2020. Now, again, Hornibrook before his injury wasn't really, of course, he wasn't that consistent, didn't play all that well this season, so it's going to be interesting to see kind of what, in the offseason, if they do open it up, or if Chris just says, Alex is our guy, he's been our starter for the last, 3+ years or whatever. So that'll be interesting to see in spring ball, kind of, if sort of how the reps are divided and things like that, and if Cohn or somebody else can actually push him. But right now, I would guess that Hornibrook ends up as a starter next year as well, before we have a new person under center the next season. All right, Tom Nisus at Nisus Tom asks, what are the odds of adding a JUCO on defense, corner, linebacker, or defensive line? I don't think they're probably not very high. I can't say for sure, but they probably only have a few spots left to fill in this 2019 recruiting class. Of course, they do have a JUCO, they have a transfer from Houston, not a JUCO, that sat out this year and is going to be, eligible at safety. Colin Wilder, who's sitting out this year. As far as JUCOs, though, I guess it's possible. I don't really see, a specific name right now that I think they might get. You never know with some of those. Sometimes they kind of come out of, sometimes those guys kind of come out of not out of nowhere, but I think sometimes you don't always see them coming like you do some of the other guys out of high school. So we'll have to see. It's hard to know exactly how many spots they're going to have open as well moving forward over the last couple months of this recruiting cycle as well. Obviously, there's a couple guys who have NFL decisions after this season that could open up a couple more spots, and David Edwards and Tyler Biotic. So we'll have to wait and see. I guess it's possible, but right now I don't necessarily, see it. Next one, Hugh Scallon at Badger Hugh asks, do you have any background on why Derek LeCaptain bolted on Wisconsin's preferred walk-on offer for the Gophers? That I really don't know. I haven't talked to him exactly to know exactly why he did that. Now, like I've said before in these Mailbag podcasts, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things that go into recruiting, a lot of reasons why a guy picks one school over another. I think you can look at a guy like LeCaptain and say, well, if he had walk-on offers from both places, why would he leave Wisconsin to go to Minnesota. But, it's just, I think there are just different, people have different priorities and different reasons for doing certain things. Maybe he thinks that he's got a better chance of playing time at Minnesota. Maybe he just likes the coaching staff a lot. Maybe he made some connections with some of the current players, younger players on the roster when he visited there. I don't know. I haven't talked to him, and I think it's just, recruiting is one of those weird things where, you wouldn't think a Wisconsin guy would, leave the state to play for Minnesota with the same offer. But then again, there's just, he's his own individual, and he's going to make his own decision based on the factors that are important to him. All right, Ben Tannenbaum at MadDog74. It's obviously not the Iron Bowl, but as an Alabama alum, how would you compare the pageantry intensity of the Axe game with other SEC rivalries? Yeah, I thought about this one a little bit. Obviously, there's some, a few rivalries I would over in the SEC I would rank over it, like the Iron Bowl, of course, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, Georgia, maybe Alabama, Tennessee. But it's, as far as a comparison, it's kind of tough. I haven't really been to a lot of the other rivalry games outside of Alabama's and actually really experienced the game day atmosphere and kind of those things. The one thing I kind of thought of is at least lately, maybe sort of like an LSU Arkansas rivalry where, I guess just trying to compare them, where LSU has been sort of like Wisconsin has been the better team in the rivalry for a long time. In their neighboring states rather than an in-state rivalry like Wisconsin, Minnesota. I guess the difference there is Arkansas has won that game in recent memory where Minnesota hasn't. But, as far as pageantry and intensity, the Egg Bowl is one that kind of gets overlooked a little bit. Mississippi State, Ole Miss. But that's a really intense rivalry in that state of Mississippi. And I think maybe Wisconsin. I think the problem with Wisconsin, Minnesota right now is just that Minnesota never wins. I think that I think it's sort of like Alabama and Tennessee right now as well, where Alabama's won so many games in a row. That Alabama-Tennessee rivalry is usually, a really big rivalry, and lately it's been it just hasn't had the same luster. I think Alabama LSU has just always been a bigger game than Alabama Tennessee year in and year out because Tennessee just hasn't won that game, and I think that's kind of the same with Wisconsin Minnesota right now. I think once Minnesota finally wins a game, I think that probably kicks up the intensity again in this Wisconsin Minnesota rivalry and maybe lights a fire under it a little bit. Now, I mean, obviously it's still been a great rivalry even during this 14 game streak for Wisconsin, and it clearly you can tell it means a lot to both programs and the players involved, the coaches involved. But yeah, I guess those are a couple comparisons for you. It's really hard to kind of make the exact comparisons having not been to those, some of those other SEC games. Now I kind of I lived in that area for a long time and kind of have an idea of those other rivalries, but unlike the Wisconsin Minnesota one and some of the Alabama ones, I haven't necessarily been and experienced the actual game day atmosphere of those. All right, TCS at TCS Irish. He says, Axe Week, what are your top Power 5 trophy games? Minnesota's inept program has caused the game to lack the importance, pageantry, and affection that it once had as seen and felt in 2003. When will the Minnesota Gophers be relevant? Yeah, I guess that kind of echoes what I just said about the rivalry, this Wisconsin-Minnesota rivalry. As far as my top Power 5 trophy games, I think, I mean, maybe I'm a little biased, but I would definitely rank the Iron Bowl number 1. That game is just crazy every year. Michigan, Ohio State would probably have to be my number 2. Then I think you could put a lot of other rivalries in there as far as the top ones. I think, obviously Oklahoma, Texas might be my number 3. Notre Dame, USC is really big. They haven't had a Notre Dame, USC game in a while where both teams were really good. I think that would be fun to see again. Florida, Georgia, I think is a really good one too. So those are just some of the top ones, I guess. Sometimes it's hard to rank those ones, but just being from where I am, I'd have to go with the Iron Bowl. All right, Jared Rudder at Jared Rudder asks, why no Nakia Watson this year? I think he's just not ready. I think there's It's a guy that it seemed like they were excited about, and it seemed like could play a role this season before he got here, but you never know how these freshmen are going to translate and kind of adapt right away. It just seems like they like a lot of backs over him right now, and I think these last few games with Tywan Deal out, some people thought, maybe we could see Nakia Watson, but I think that they don't want to just throw a senior like Chris James to the side just to get the young guys some reps in games like this. I think if they feel like Chris James has earned reps over Nakia Watson, then he's going to get those reps. And fans can say, well, you got to look forward for the future, get the freshman some reps and see what he can do, and he can still redshirt. But I don't think that's just not how the program operates. I think if there's a senior there that's earned those reps, I think they're going to want to give him his chance. So yeah, I just don't think Watson's quite ready this year. And next year, I think when Deal and Chris James are both gone, I think maybe that Watson at least has a chance, if he can stay ahead of Bradrick Shaw and some other guys to go out there and get some carries. So we'll have to see kind of how he progresses in the offseason. All right, Go Muck at Hanzo_Steel asks, what practice adjustments are made for a running back that ran for 321 yards and two inside linebackers who played 100 snaps each? That's a good question. I've talked to Jonathan Taylor actually last week before this Purdue game, kind of about his workload and, if he felt like he was wearing out or not. He said that he's actually doing a lot better job this year of kind of his recovery and handling the heavy workload. Now, obviously he hasn't had a game like he did Saturday where he had 33 carries, triple overtime game, 321 yards, took a lot of hits. But I think they're doing a better job. He's doing a better job of kind of preparing his body to take on this heavy workload. So I think he's going to be okay. You don't have the extra game this year either with the Big Ten title game. So this is kind of the last one you have to go through before you get a lot of time off. So I think he's going to be okay now with the inside linebackers. It seemed like I remember earlier in the season it seemed like they were kind of rotating those guys in and out a lot. They were playing Chris Hoare and Jack Sanborn a lot in some of those early season games. And I kind of asked about that, Jim Leonard about that, a while back, and he said they just want to keep them, Edwards and Connolly as fresh as they can for the sort of make it a marathon and not a sprint, and kind of keep them sort of as fresh as they can going into the last stretch of the season. I think that kind of allowed them to play those, 100 snaps each in a game like this, as they were kind of managing those guys pretty well, kind of their workload throughout the season. So I think that kind of allowed them to have a game like this and to still not be completely spent. So I'm sure they're maybe giving them a little bit more time off and maybe limiting their practice reps a little bit. Now we don't get to watch practice throughout the season, so we haven't really seen if that's actually changed or not. But I think that they've done a good enough job of kind of managing those guys, prior to that game, where they should be able to get through this one more game against Minnesota before you have the long layoff before the bowl game. So I think those guys are going to be all right. All right, Frank at Frank Grehek. What do you envision as the quarterback battle next year? Will it be Hornibrook and Cohn only, or do you anticipate Mertz will be in the mix? Yeah, I guess we've sort of hit on this already. Like I said, I kind of anticipate Hornibrook to still be the starter. I think anybody who, if they open up the quarterback competition, we'll have to see who's included in that. Obviously, there's Chase Wolf as well, who is a true freshman this year, and a lot of people were excited about before Mertz committed. So we'll have to see how he develops as well. Now, like I said, I'm really not even 100% sure, if they're going to have a real battle, or if we'll get to the spring and it'll look like Hornibrook's kind of their guy still. It's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. I think it's something we can't really answer right now. Like I said, my prediction is that Hornibrook plays one more year. Maybe they open up the competition. And we just don't know how good Graham Mertz is yet. We can watch him against, Kansas high school football competition, but is that, it's not really going to tell us the whole story on if he's going to be able to come in as a freshman and compete for that job right away. I think there's going to be some sort of an adjustment period, and him coming in the spring would help, but, I don't necessarily think after 5-6 months here, I'm not really sure if that's going to be enough for him to be ready to really compete for that job either. So I think it's just kind of a wait and see how Mertz looks in the spring, See kind of the split, the how they're splitting reps between the quarterbacks, between Hornibrook and Cone, and kind of see what the situation is there. It's not really something I think we can answer or we're going to get an answer on right now. All right, CT Badger 22 at CT Badger 1. He said he saw a lot of shotgun formation with Jonathan Taylor running out of apparent pass formations. The spread allowed him more space to run. Will we see more of that concept? Yeah, I think we could, and I wrote about this in our film room story this week that I posted on Tuesday, if you want to check that out on madison.com, sort of within the Jonathan Taylor section there at the beginning. But yeah, I think what kind of allowed them to get into that was that they actually showed a little bit of a threat of a downfield passing game. Obviously, they still only passed for 160 yards, but they at least showed that they had the ability to throw down the field. And I think that kind of allowed them to put Taylor in there, especially when you're trailing kind of late in a game like that. And then, I think as long as they sort of respect that pass, if you spread them out like that, that is going to give Taylor a lot more room to run. And, we saw... and we saw a couple times too where they got in that formation with Taylor in the shotgun and they still did pass the ball. And Taylor actually threw a couple blocks in pass protection, which we haven't really seen him do, before this game. I think that's kind of key as well. If you can at least pass a couple times out of that formation when Taylor's in the game. Now, I know he's not their passing down back, but if you do that and you allow the defense to know, okay, they really might pass out of this formation even though Taylor's in the game, then that can open up space for you. I think Purdue, realized that they did respect the pass, and so they were going to, a nickel package a lot of those times when Wisconsin spread it out with three wide and Taylor in the backfield. And so, that took a defensive lineman off the field and added an extra defensive back and spread them out. And, now we'll see. I think a lot of teams, we'll see how Minnesota and other teams start playing this. It's not something they really showed before that game. Probably caught Purdue off a little bit. Maybe when Wisconsin shows that in the next couple games, defenses played a little bit differently. Maybe they say, we don't really care that you're spreading us out here, or that you got three wide receivers out there. We're not, we're going to still make you beat us through the air, and we're not going to sit here and change our formation and do what you want us to do here, so you can give Taylor the ball and give him space to run. So it's going to be interesting to see if they go back to that, how much they do it, and if defenses play it a little bit differently than Purdue did. So that's a good question. I think that's something definitely to watch in this game against Minnesota and kind of moving forward if they do go back to that. All right, Craig at Cobra Badger, sorry. he asks, what is the issue with all the false start penalties? I've never seen so many in a two-game stretch. Is the line having a tough time with Cone's cadence? Yeah, I think there have been 9 false start penalties in the last 2 games. 8 by the offensive line and then 1 by Kyle Pinston. It's kind of staggering. I haven't really seen that either, and especially that one series against Penn State where they had, I think it was 3 in one series there. That was a 3 and out. So it was, it's not really. It's not really acceptable. And we've asked, Joe Rudolph about it this week, and he said, he kind of mentioned that, one of them against Purdue was, the movement of the defense. I think it was the 3rd and 1 for Wisconsin. The movement of the defense kind of threw somebody off, and they jumped. But then he also said that he mentioned they have had different quarterbacks in there. So I think that definitely plays a factor. But he also said you just can't use those things as an excuse. At the end of the day, you're going at the snap, and you have to just hold off until that ball is snapped. And whether there's crowd noise or a different quarterback in there, or the defense is moving, it just doesn't really matter. You can't. It's just not acceptable to have 9 false start penalties, no matter what you're facing. And I think that's something they're definitely going to try to clean up. And I think the Penn State game, you kind of wrote it off as a tough road environment, just one of those things. But when you have 2 straight games where you have 4 or 5 false start penalties in each game, I definitely think it's going to be a big emphasis this week. And being at home probably will help a little bit too in this Minnesota game. They don't have any more true road games the rest of the season, but I think it's something they're definitely harping on this week. All right, Kevin at DC Badger 7 asks, what are the odds Dunn is replaced at punt returner? He consistently cost UW field position with his poor judgment on fielding punts. I guess I wouldn't really agree with that, Kevin. I think he's done a better job than some of the punt returners of the past few years for Wisconsin of kind of coming up and catching certain balls that are short punts or getting to some of those balls. Now there have been a couple obviously that he hasn't been able to get to, but I haven't really been. I remember the last few years that a lot of times I would, kind of watch Badger punt returners, and there are a lot of kicks where they maybe could have fielded, but they were playing it really safe, let the ball bounce, and it runs 15 more yards downfield. And I think Dunn's done a pretty good job of preventing that, in my opinion. Now maybe I need to go back and kind of break it down a little bit more. I haven't really crunched the numbers on kind of how many he's let go by and how many he's caught, but I think he's done an okay job. I don't think he's had a couple more recently where he's actually been able to get a return off and pick up a few yards, but he hasn't really been a threat as a returner necessarily. But I think he's done a good job with his judgment of kind of when to field a punt and when to not field a punt. So I don't think he's going to be replaced. I mean, obviously there's only a couple of games left here. I think he's got the job the rest of this year. Now we'll see in the offseason if somebody's able to kind of pass him up. It looked like Danny Davis would have been the guy this year before he had a suspension, and I think they liked what Dunn did the first couple games, and he just kind of kept the job. So maybe there's a couple guys like Danny Davis or maybe somebody else that can challenge him in the offseason, but I don't see him being replaced for these last couple games. All right, we still got a few more here. Knocked down but not out asks, how are the Badgers fixed for field goal kicking and punting in the future? I think kicking they're going to be okay. They have a redshirt freshman this year in Colin Larsh who has looked really good in practice in the offseason. I think in fall camp he was kicking the ball really well, and I think he's got a really good chance to be a 3-year starter after Gaglianone leaves after this season. So I think he's going to be a guy that really could be a good kicker here. Now, again, we haven't seen him kick in an actual game, so it's always hard to kind of know how that's going to happen. But Zach Kentz also has one more year that he can kind of compete with Larsh and of course be your long field goal kicker as well and help and be really good on kickoffs, of course. So I think they're okay there. As far as punting, that's a tougher one to answer. I think Lottie and Allen both have one more season after this. So I think they're going to continue to, I guess, battle for that job. But after next year, there's not really a guy, on the roster sort of down the line where the sort of the definite next guy to take over. I think they definitely could add a punter, whether it's this year or next year at some point in the near future. Right now, punting is sort of a little bit more of a question mark after next season. All right, Richard Calson at RDK1212. He asks, based on what you saw on Saturday, does Logan Bruss have a long-term All-Big Ten potential? If needed, can Jonathan Taylor run for 300 yards against the Gophers? And which of the young DBs have the most long-term potential? Okay, got a lot of stuff here. First on Logan Bruss, I think he definitely does have All-Big Ten potential. I think as a redshirt freshman, he already looks really good. I mean, he's a guy that stepped in there against Purdue last week at right tackle in his first start, and I thought played really well. I talked about him in the film room piece as well that we posted on Tuesday on madison.com, just sort of about some of the good blocks he had down the stretch of that game. Obviously, he made a couple mental mistakes too, but I thought he played really well. So I think if Edwards leaves, I think he steps right in there at right tackle and can do a pretty decent job. And I think he definitely has potential to be an All Big Ten player, at some point in his career for sure. Can Jonathan Taylor run for 300 yards against Minnesota? Yeah, I mean, I guess he can. I mean, we definitely have seen, obviously the last game was pretty incredible, and it took him more than regulation to get over 300. And that was obviously a career high for him. I don't anticipate him, rushing for 300 again. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. I mean, he's obviously talented enough to do so. Now, that's actually an interesting question too, because Minnesota's rushing defense has really improved the last 2 weeks under the new defensive coordinator. They gave up a ton of rushing yards in that bad loss to Illinois a few weeks ago. I think it was over 400 rushing yards, if I'm not mistaken, against Illinois. And then they've held their last two opponents, Purdue and Northwestern, under 100. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they play Taylor, if they're able to slow him down. I think Taylor will have a pretty big game. Can he run for 300? I kind of doubt it, but I wouldn't put anything past him at this point. And then which of the young defensive backs have the most long-term potential? I really like Faion Hicks a lot, and I know he had a bad game last week against Purdue. I actually asked Jim Leonard about that, and he said he kind of indicated that Hicks probably wasn't 100%, but he played anyway, and kind of fought through something. So I mean that's something to keep in mind, I guess. And I think a lot of those deep balls that he gave up, he was kind of right there, just didn't get his head around in time and couldn't quite make the play. Obviously, it was a really good passing offense they were facing as well. I thought Hicks had started to play really well in the week leading up to that game last week, so I really like his long-term potential. I think he and Wild Goose are I think Hicks and Wild Goose, I mean, they're the starters right now, and I kind of see them as the two long-term guys I would kind of peg to continue starting. I really like both of them, and look, they have a lot of young talent that could really step. I think Deron Harrell has I think he's got a pretty high ceiling. He's got quite a bit of potential if he can kind of continue to grow and develop. I mean, he made 2 really big pass breakups late in that game against Purdue. They trusted him to put him in the game at the end of that, in the last 2 minutes there, and he stepped up big for them. Caesar Williams is kind of forgotten at this point, but he hasn't been playing quite as much later in the season. But he was a starter to start this year and hasn't been playing all that poorly. So, and of course Madison Cone is a guy that played a little bit as a true freshman last year. So they have a lot of guys that could. It kind of depends on how these guys develop. But if I had to pick a couple right now that I think have the most potential, I really like Hicks and Wild Goose going forward. All right, Knocked Down, Not Out has one more question. Do you see the offensive line being able to have a dominant performance against Minnesota? I think they definitely could. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that defense has done a better job the last couple of weeks of stopping the run, but I think Wisconsin will be able to win up front. I think if you're Wisconsin, you want to be able to establish that running game early, kind of sustain some long drives, keep Minnesota's offense off the field, and kind of take the air out of a Minnesota team that's probably going to come in really hyped up, and obviously they're trying to play for a bowl eligibility here to seal the Axe back for the first time since 2003. They've been playing better the last couple of weeks, and so I think they're going to be amped up coming in here. And if you can sustain a couple long drives early and kind of take the air out of their game a little bit, I think that would be really beneficial. And I think the offensive line will be able to do that. So I think they'll play well. I think Taylor will have a pretty good game, and Wisconsin will be able to win. All right, Liv Moss at Joe RY_Mama asks, is the plan to move Lyles back to O-line next year? That we don't know of yet. We're asking that earlier in the year, and they didn't really have an answer for us. Just Lyles just said he's at defensive line now. He's happy with that, and is not really looking forward after this year. I think a lot. Some of it might depend on kind of what they feel like they have on the offensive line next year. I think obviously Tyler Biadasz will have an NFL decision if he were to leave early. He's only a redshirt sophomore, but if he were to leave early, maybe they need Lyles a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball. He's a guy that did play center during spring ball. And, he played both guard spots and center, so he can kind of play any of those interior spots. And if they're replacing all 3 guys on the interior, then maybe they feel like they need him there. Obviously, you still don't have the depth on the defensive line maybe you would like, but when you have Garrett Rand coming back, and hopefully Isaiah Loudermilk can stay a little healthier next year, then maybe you're a little bit more set on the defensive line. So that's something I'm going to try. We'll ask again probably in the bowl season coming up, whether they're, and of course heading into spring ball too. We'll kind of see where they put him. That's sort of going to be one of the interesting questions of sort of the early off season here is where is Lyles going to be. So that's, and that we can't really answer right now what that's going to happen. I think it depends on a lot of things, but that's something that hopefully we'll get an answer on in the relatively near future. All right, last one here from Rockwist711 at Palace Rock. Did anyone agree that the offensive line had senioritis, sloppy on the snap counts, and inconsistent play? Yeah, I guess this is another thing we've already kind of hit on. Like I said, obviously the false starts are not acceptable. And of course, I'm sure they're trying to clean that up, and there are a couple of different variables that lead to that. I'm sure that different quarterback being in there has a little bit of play in that. I don't necessarily, you asked if they had senioritis. I think I've seen you say this a couple times in the past. I don't really, I wouldn't say they have senioritis. I mean, I think that, obviously there's only 2 guys on the line that are definitely leaving who are actually seniors. And of course there's 2 more guys that will have decisions to make on the NFL that we'll have to wait and see what they decide on. But I think they, like I said earlier in the podcast, I think they've actually played pretty well this year outside of a couple games where they were really off. I think their struggles have been a little bit overblown this year. Obviously, it hasn't been quite what you expected with them having the expectations to be the best offensive line in the country and possibly the best offensive line in school history. They haven't quite been on the level of maybe the best line in school history. I think maybe they haven't been that, but I do think they've been. I think they've been really good. I think it's you would like to see a little bit more consistency. You want to see a line with this much talent not have that off game here and there that they have had this season. Like I said, against whether it's BYU or Penn State or what have you. But I think on the whole they've been good, and those guys on the line have played really well. I think Bo Benshaw has had his best season as a Badger. David Edwards has been dealing with an injury all season too. That probably plays into effect a little bit. I mean, that BYU game and the Penn State game, really, both of those games, you could tell he was not at 100%. And those are 2 of the worst games for the line this season. I think he was really poor against BYU. And in Penn State, you got to remember, at Penn State game, he really missed some blocks there. And the next, he missed the next game because of the injury. It seemed like it was getting too much for him. He was added to the injury report after that Penn State game. So to have your right tackle not be able to kind of make those blocks and be 100% in some of those games might have an effect as well. So I don't know. You asked if they have senioritis. I don't think that's really the case. I think that maybe they haven't been as consistent as you would like. But on the whole, there's a couple reasons for that, and I think on the whole they've actually been pretty good. But I think a lot of people on the Badgers, a lot of position groups have underperformed this year, and the offensive line, I guess you could include in that group as not being quite as good as we expected them to be. But in the end, I think that I think they've still been pretty good. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks for all your questions for this week. I know it was Thanksgiving, but you guys still came through with a lot of good questions before you guys kind of dug into your turkey. We're going to do another live chat, our last live chat of the regular season on Saturday after the Minnesota game. So make sure you follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway to get sort of an update on when I'm going to go live there. And of course, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the Red Zone on iTunes or Google Play. Just takes a second and it's free. And keep visiting madison.com for all of your Badgers football coverage. Thanks for listening.